Darien never thought his life would lead him to the Joran Empire, a place where the richest, most powerful beings in the galaxy resided. He was just a wanderer, a traveler with a hunger for knowledge, a man who had never asked for fame or recognition. But destiny had a different plan. Darien had discovered an ancient star map, one that seemed to call out to him, guiding him toward the farthest reaches of the galaxy. After months of exploration, he arrived at Zorna 6, the magnificent floating city where the Joran Empire's royal family ruled. Little did Darien know, his arrival would alter the course of history in ways he could never have imagined. Zorna 6 was a sight to behold. The city, built on floating islands above an endless sea of stars, shimmered with alien technology beyond anything Darien had ever seen. Towering structures of glass and metal stretched into the heavens, their spires glowing with strange energy. As he stepped off his starship, Darien couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and trepidation. The Joran Empire was one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, known for their mastery of both science and sorcery. The royal family was a legend in itself, with 3 daughters who were rumored to be the most powerful beings alive. They were beings of incredible beauty, grace, and strength, but also ruthless in their dealings with anyone who dared to challenge them. Darien was escorted to the palace, where he was presented before the 3 sisters, Adira, Belin, and Sira. Each sister was a vision of otherworldly beauty. Adira, the eldest, had long, flowing silver hair and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. Her calm, composed demeanor gave off an air of authority. Belin, the middle sister, exuded a more playful charm, with dark eyes that sparkled with mischief and a smile that could disarm even the most wary of men. Sira, the youngest, was full of energy, her wild red hair and piercing green eyes matching her fiery personality. The sisters were a force to be reckoned with, and their reputations spread across the galaxy like wildfire. When Darien stood before them, he couldn't help but feel out of place. The sisters stared at him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and amusement. They were used to beings of power, warriors, sorcerers, and conquerors. But Darien was nothing like them. He was a human, a simple, fragile creature by their standards. His short stature, pale skin, and plain clothes made him seem even smaller in comparison to their towering forms. For a moment, the sisters exchanged looks, their lips curving into faint smiles. They couldn't help but laugh. "You think you're worthy of our attention?" Adira's voice, though sweet, carried an edge. Her gaze swept over him, studying every inch of his body as if trying to find a reason to respect him. But there was none. He was just a human, weak, fragile, and unworthy. Belin laughed softly, a sound that was both mocking and intrigued. "A human here? In our presence? How amusing," she said, her tone light but dismissive. It was clear that they didn't see him as a threat, and they certainly didn't see him as a peer. Sira, the youngest, was the most vocal. "What could you possibly want from us?" she asked with a smirk, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She stepped closer to him, her eyes gleaming with amusement. What could a human want with 3 powerful immortal sisters like us? Darien stood his ground, despite the mocking laughter and the way they looked down on him. He had traveled across galaxies, faced dangers far worse than anything they could imagine, and survived. He had no reason to be afraid of their mockery. With a steady breath, he met their gazes one by one, unwavering. "I seek knowledge," Darien said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "I've journeyed far to learn the secrets of the galaxy, to understand the mysteries that no one else dares to uncover. And perhaps a future with one of you." The sisters stopped laughing, their expressions momentarily flickering with surprise. For the first time, they saw something in Darien that they hadn't expected: determination. The quiet confidence in his words made them pause. But then, as if on cue, they burst into laughter once again, louder this time. Adira's eyes sparkled, with amusement as she shook her head. "A human?" she repeated, her voice thick with disbelief. "How quaint. You think you, a mere mortal, are worthy of our attention? Do you not realize who we are? We are the daughters of the greatest empire in the galaxy. We are beings of power and influence, beyond anything you could ever dream of." Boleyn, still laughing, added, "You're not even fit to stand in our presence, let alone ask for anything from us." And Sira, who had been the most outspoken, joined in. "Oh, this is rich. A human thinking he can be part of our world. What makes you think you deserve a place here?" Darian could feel the sting of their words, but he didn't falter. He had faced worse in his travels. "I don't think I deserve anything," he said quietly, "but I do believe that the universe has a way of connecting the most unlikely of people. I seek to learn, to understand. If that means gaining your favor, then so be it." The sisters exchanged glances, their laughter dying down. There was something different about this human. He wasn't afraid. In fact, he seemed more curious about them than they had ever seen anyone be. The way he spoke, so confidently, yet humbly, it was as if he saw beyond their power, beyond their beauty, to something more. But to the sisters, that wasn't enough. They were used to being admired, feared, and adored by countless beings across the galaxy. The idea that a human would think himself worthy of their time was laughable. And so, they dismissed him, thinking him nothing more than a curiosity. They couldn't fathom that he would have anything to offer. For them, humans were simply inconsequential, a race that didn't belong in the same league as the mighty Zorans. What they didn't know was that Darian was no ordinary human, and his presence in their lives was about to change everything. Though they couldn't yet see it. The seeds of something far greater had been planted, and the galaxy would soon learn that Darian was not just a traveler. He was a force that even the Zoran Empire could not ignore. The palace of King Kalen, ruler of the Zoran Empire, sat atop a floating island, its grand spires cutting through the clouded sky like needles piercing a dark fabric. Inside, the royal chambers glowed with the soft light of glowing orbs, their colors shifting to match the mood of the room. The palace, built from ancient stone and silver-like metals, was adorned with intricate carvings of Zoran history, epic battles, great conquests, and the rise of their empire. The king's chamber was a place of great power, where decisions that shaped the fate of galaxies were made. Tonight, however, it held a tension unlike any other. King Kalen, a figure both revered and feared across the galaxy, stood at the head of the room, his long black cloak trailing behind him like the shadow of a starless night. His sharp eyes, dark as a distant nebula, were fixed upon his three daughters, who stood before him with hesitant expressions. The king's presence commanded respect, and the air around him felt charged with the weight of unspoken words. For a moment, the room fell silent as the sisters, each of them incredibly powerful in their own right, awaited their father's words. "Adira," Kalen's voice echoed through the chamber. "Boleyn, Sira, come closer." The three sisters stepped forward, their steps as graceful as dancers. Each sister, despite their differences in temperament, shared one thing in common: their unmatched beauty and strength. Adira, the eldest, her silver hair cascading like a waterfall down her back, was composed and calm, her expression always unreadable. Boleyn, the middle sister, had a fire in her eyes and an ever-present smirk that hinted at her mischievous nature. Sira, the youngest, was full of energy, her fiery red hair and wild green eyes radiating an unpredictable, youthful energy. Together, they were the living embodiment of the Zoran legacy, and their father had always been immensely proud of them. Yet now, the sisters sensed a shift in the air, a tension that wasn't there before. They had never seen their father like this. Kalen's gaze never wavered. His eyes locked onto each of his daughters, one by one. "You have laughed at the human," he said, his tone sharp, but not unkind. "But I have seen something in him. He is not like the others you have encountered. I have witnessed his strength, his determination. I command you, as your king and your father, marry him." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The three sisters blinked, their minds struggling to process what their father had just said. The notion of marrying a human was not just unexpected, it was absurd. They were daughters of an empire that had crushed entire civilizations, beings of immense power and wisdom who could bend the laws of nature to their will. To think that they would now marry a mere human seemed like a joke, a mistake. The sisters glanced at one another, exchanging looks of disbelief. Adira, always the most poised and controlled, was the first to speak, though her voice quivered ever so slightly. "Father," she began, her voice calm but edged with uncertainty. "You misunderstand. This human, he is nothing. We are the rulers of the stars. We command armies. We shape the very fabric of space and time. What could a human possibly offer us?" The king remained unmoved, his expression as hard as the unyielding rock that formed the foundation of their city. "You are mistaken if you think strength is the only measure of value. This human has accomplished feats that no Joran has ever faced. He has walked through storms of fire, survived the darkest corners of the galaxy, and has shown a willpower that is rare even among our kind. It is not power alone that makes one strong, but the heart, the soul. And he possesses both." Boleyn, who was usually quick to speak her mind, now found herself hesitating. "Father, if he is so strong, why does he need us?" she asked, her voice no longer carrying the mocking tone it once had. The question hung in the air like a challenge, yet her voice wavered slightly, betraying the confusion she felt. It was as though she couldn't comprehend the concept of a human being anything other than a lesser creature. The king sighed, the weight of his wisdom pressing down on him. "Strength comes in many forms, my daughter. Sometimes it is not the body that determines the course of fate, but the heart and the mind. Darian, the human, has seen things that no one else has dared to witness. He has been tested in ways you cannot understand. Perhaps it is time you learned that there are different kinds of strength, and the strength to love, without fear, without hesitation, that is a rare and powerful thing. He is not like others you have encountered." Sierra, the youngest, stepped forward, her face twisted in disbelief. "But father," she said, her voice a mix of defiance and genuine confusion. "He's a human. He's so small, so fragile. What makes him different? Why should we marry him?" The king's expression softened just slightly, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Because, Sierra, the universe has a way of weaving its threads in ways we do not always understand. Perhaps this human, this traveler, has come into our lives for a reason. I can see the future clearly, and I believe that Darian will play a vital role in what is to come. You will marry him, not because I command it, but because it is fate." The room grew heavy with the king's words. His voice, filled with the wisdom of countless centuries, reverberated in the hearts of the three sisters. It was unlike anything they had ever heard from him. The king had always been a man of tradition, and his commands were always followed without question. But now, something about his words seemed to carry a weight they couldn't ignore. Adira, usually the most rational of the three, found herself struggling with this new reality. She had never believed in fate. She had always relied on her strength, her intellect, and her control over the power that coursed through her veins. But now, her father was telling her that something else was at play, a force greater than strength, or power. She felt a seed of doubt take root in her mind. Could this human truly be as important as her father believed? Boleyn, too, was silent, her sharp mind racing to process the information. She had always prided herself on being able to see through illusions, to understand the true nature of things. But now, for the first time, she felt as though she was looking at a puzzle she couldn't solve. Why would the king, who had never been wrong, command something so strange, so out of the ordinary? Sira, ever the impulsive one, crossed her arms and glared at her father. "I don't understand, father. Why this human? Why not someone of our kind?" The king turned toward her, his gaze penetrating. "Because, my daughters, sometimes the greatest strength lies in something unexpected. The future will unfold in ways you cannot foresee. Trust me, when the time comes, you will see the wisdom in my decision." The three sisters stood there, their minds whirling with thoughts and doubts. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The king's command was final. They would marry Darien, the human. And whether they liked it or not, their lives were about to change forever. The day of the human's arrival was unlike any the Joran royal family had ever witnessed. The palace, usually a bastion of peace and power, was alive with energy and anticipation. The king had given his order, and now it was time for the three sisters to meet the human who had shaken the very foundations of their world. Kaelin, though rarely showing emotion, seemed oddly calm, as if the decision had already been made long before he issued the command. The sisters stood in the royal courtyard, gazing down at the grand landing platform where the human's transport was expected to arrive. The platform, made of shining silver, stretched out like a gleaming ribbon against the backdrop of the sky, waiting to receive its guest. The air hummed with an unnatural stillness, the kind that precedes a storm. Adira stood with her arms crossed, her silver hair shimmering in the soft light. Her piercing eyes were fixed on the horizon, searching for the ship that would carry the one she had been commanded to marry. Despite her outward composure, a sense of unease lingered within her. She had never been one to question her father's judgment, but this situation felt different, a human. She couldn't wrap her mind around it. She had always been taught that Zorans were the superior species, the ones who held dominion over the stars. And now her father had ordered them to welcome a human into their lives, as though he were some equal. She could sense her sister's apprehension as well. Belin, the second sister, leaned against a pillar, her usual playful demeanor replaced by a rare silence. Sira, the youngest, was pacing back and forth, her restless energy betraying the confusion she felt. Finally, the silence was broken by a soft hum in the air. A speck appeared on the horizon, slowly growing larger until it became unmistakably clear. It was the human's ship, a small but sleek craft gliding through the sky, cutting through the clouds with ease. The sisters watched in unison as the ship descended toward the platform, its engines emitting a faint roar before it settled with a gentle thud, its landing gear touching the surface. The anticipation in the air was thick, almost suffocating. The human had arrived. The doors of the ship opened, and a figure emerged. At first, the sisters couldn't make out any distinguishing features, just a silhouette against the bright light of the ship's interior. But as the figure stepped forward, they saw him clearly for the first time. Darien, the human, was tall, but not towering like a Zoran. He had a muscular build, though not as imposing as any of the Zorans. His skin, though pale by their standards, had a warmth to it. His brown hair was short, and his eyes, though human, seemed to gleam with an intensity that set him apart from the others. His expression was calm, but there was something about him, something undeniable, that made the sisters' hearts race. Kaelin, standing at the front of the gathering, stepped forward to greet him, a smile playing at the edges of his lips. The sisters followed in silent procession, their eyes fixed on the human who had already begun to change the course of their lives. Darien's eyes swept across them, pausing briefly on each of the sisters. His gaze lingered on Adira the longest, and for a moment, the air seemed to crackle between them. there was no doubt he felt the same tension. He was being thrust into a world that was completely foreign to him, yet there was no sign of fear in his eyes. Kalen spoke first, his voice strong and commanding. "Darian, welcome to the Joran Empire. You stand before us now, and though you are a human, know that we respect you. We have heard much of your deeds, and it is with honor that I introduce you to my daughters, the heirs to the Zoran throne." He gestured to the three sisters. Adira, Balin, Sira. Darian bowed respectfully, his eyes still scanning each sister. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady, though a hint of awe lingered in it. "It is an honor to be here." He straightened, and his gaze settled on the three sisters once more. There was a brief pause as he took them in, his eyes lingering on Adira once more. "It's a strange thing to be among such powerful beings." Adira felt her heart skip a beat. He didn't flinch at their power, nor did he seem intimidated by their presence. She could see why her father had been so insistent on this marriage. There was something about him, a quiet strength, a certainty in his demeanor, that made her feel something. She couldn't quite name it, but it was undeniable. A small flicker of doubt sparked within her. Was it possible that this human, this stranger, was something more than just an outsider? Balin, who had been silent up until this point, stepped forward with a playful grin on her lips. "So, you're the one who's supposed to tame us, huh?" she teased, her tone light, but with an undercurrent of curiosity. "I'm sure this will be interesting." Sira, always quick to act, crossed her arms and eyed him with a mixture of disbelief and fascination. "You're not at all what I expected," she muttered, still unsure what to make of this human who had somehow, impossibly, been brought into their world. Darian, still calm and composed, met Sira's gaze directly. "I never expected any of this either," he said, his voice steady, but there was a glimmer of humor in his eyes. "But I've learned never to underestimate anything, especially not the unexpected." Kalen's smile widened slightly, though he kept his composure. "Indeed, there is much for you to learn, Darian, and there is much for my daughters to learn from you." As the conversation continued, Adira found herself caught in the strange pull of Darian's presence. He was so different from anyone she had ever encountered. His calmness in the face of the unknown, his willingness to embrace the strange circumstances, and the quiet confidence he exuded. And yet, there was something unsettling about it all. She had spent her life preparing for the role she would play in the Joran Empire, training, studying, and honing her power. She had never imagined that a human would become so important to her future. But as she stood there, watching Darian speak with her sisters and her father, she realized that the king's decision was not one made out of impulse. There was a deeper reasoning behind it, a hidden truth that none of them yet understood. Her father had seen something in Darian, something that none of them had noticed. And now, it was up to the three sisters to navigate this new world, to discover the truth behind the human who had somehow captivated them all. Little did they know, the challenges they would face would test not only their strength, but also their very understanding of what it meant to be powerful. And in time, they would come to see that Darian's place in their lives was more than just a command from their father. It was part of a greater destiny that none of them had anticipated. As the days passed, the royal palace buzzed with an energy that was both foreign and unsettling. The human, Darian, had become an unwelcome presence in the lives of the three sisters. Adira, Balin, and Sira found themselves caught in a web of expectation, power, and confusion. The king, their father, had made his decision clear. They were to marry the human. At first, they had laughed at the idea, certain that it was a temporary decree, something that would fade once their father saw how absurd it was. But the king's resolve was unwavering, and with every passing day, the sisters found themselves entangled in a world that none of them had prepared for. Adira, always the strongest of the three, had been the first to truly try and understand Darian. He was, after all, the one their father had chosen for them. Her nightly meditation had been filled with strange thoughts of him. She tried to focus, to clear her mind, but it was impossible. His face would appear in her thoughts. His calm demeanor, the way he seemed so unfazed by their power, by their heritage. She had been taught to believe in Joran's superiority, her strength, her lineage, her power. But Darian's presence had begun to unravel those beliefs. He didn't look at her with fear. He didn't worship her as they all had expected. Instead, he seemed to look at her as an equal, as if he were already standing beside her as a partner rather than beneath her, as the king had intended. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure began to mount. The palace had transformed into something of a gilded cage. The sisters, once free to roam and rule with grace, now felt trapped by their father's orders. They had always known the weight of their position, but the idea of marriage to a human felt like a betrayal of everything they had known. They were the daughters of the king, the future rulers of the Joran Empire. How could they be expected to marry a being so foreign, so insignificant in comparison to their grandeur? Boleyn had never been one to hide her feelings, and it was clear, to anyone who saw her, that she was struggling. Her normally playful, carefree nature had dimmed, replaced by an air of rebellion. She no longer found joy in the games and antics that had once defined her. Instead, her gaze often wandered to the farthest reaches of the palace, to the horizon where she would dream of escape. Sira, the youngest, was no better. Her vibrant energy had been replaced by a restless, anxious energy. She no longer paced the halls in excitement, but did so now in frustration, constantly seeking answers that no one seemed to have. They had been commanded to accept Darian, to marry him, but neither of them had any idea why. Why had their father chosen him? What could he possibly offer them? Was he truly worth the price of their freedom? The king, meanwhile, had taken to speaking less and less with his daughters. His interactions with them had become more formal, his gaze more distant. It was clear that his mind was occupied with something beyond their concerns. For once, the royal palace did not feel like home to the three sisters. The warmth and comfort they had once known now seemed to fade into cold, empty corridors. The laughter that had once echoed through the halls had disappeared, replaced by the sound of silence and duty. Then, one evening, Darian appeared at the palace again. His arrival, no longer a shocking event, had become a regular occurrence. He had become a fixture in their lives, a symbol of something that neither Adira, Boleyn, nor Sira could fully understand. The sisters were summoned to the palace's grand hall to meet him. The king, as always, sat at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on the three sisters as they entered. Darian was beside him, standing with the quiet dignity that had so fascinated Adira from the start. This time, the king's eyes held no mirth, no playful glint. His expression was grim, and the atmosphere in the room was thick with expectation. "Tonight we discuss the future," the king said, his voice low and firm. "I have made my decision, and you will accept it. This is not a request." His gaze lingered on each of his daughters, then turned to Darian. "This human will become a part of this family, as you will become his. I have seen the strength he possesses, the potential he has to offer our empire. It is not just his deeds that have brought him here, but his spirit. You will marry him, and you will do it without question." The sisters stood frozen, their minds racing. Adira, the oldest and usually the most composed, felt a rush of emotions surge within her. Confusion, anger, betrayal. She had always known her father to be a man of strategy, of power, but she had never seen him so unyielding. She looked to Boleyn and Sira, seeking some kind of support, but both of them were equally silent. There was no rebellion left in them, no argument to be made. It was clear that the king's will could not be undone. Darien, for his part, stood still, his eyes meeting each of theirs with a quiet understanding. It was almost as if he had expected this moment, as if he had already known what would come. He was calm, as always, but there was something more to him now. Adira couldn't explain it, but there was a shift in his energy. The air around him seemed to hum with a kind of purpose that made her uneasy. He had changed in the time since his arrival. He was no longer just a human, a stranger in their world. He was something more, and that was when it hit her. Her father had not chosen Darien for his deeds, for his strength, or even for his spirit. No, Darien had been chosen because he was something that the Joran Empire needed, something that none of them had understood until now. He was the key to something greater, something that would change everything for the Jorans. The power that the human possessed, the strength he could bring to their empire, was not one that could be seen with mere eyes. It was something deeper, something that could only be unlocked by those who truly understood what it meant to marry into the power of another world. The king had known this from the start. Adira's thoughts swirled as she realized the truth. Her father's decision was not just about marriage. It was about survival, about the future of their people. The galaxy had begun to shift, and the Jorans needed more than just strength to survive. They needed alliances, unity between species. Darien's presence, his blood, was a bridge between the two worlds. With a heavy heart, Adira understood. The king's will was final, and there was no escaping it. It wasn't just a matter of duty anymore, it was a matter of fate. The three sisters, the heirs to the Joran throne, were now bound to a human who would change their empire forever. And as they stood before him, they realized that their futures were no longer their own. They were part of something much bigger than any of them had ever imagined. The laughter had long since faded, replaced by a quiet understanding of what must be done. The human had arrived, and with him, the future of the Joran Empire.